There's no way around it. It was an ugly preseason game Saturday night in Charlotte, but the Jets got an encouraging performance from one of their most important players. We'll talk about that and more today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, August 19th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangrenNation.com. Thank you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, the Jets won their second preseason game of the preseason Saturday night in Charlotte. They beat the Carolina Panthers 15-12. I don't know if that really felt like a win. In fact, I almost began the show by offering my condolences to anybody who had to watch that game, because when you get a bad preseason game, when you get a poorly played preseason game, I mean, there's nothing worse when we're talking about watching the NFL. And that was a very poorly played preseason game. And I think sometimes, especially when you get down to these third and fourth string quarterbacks, you just have guys who cannot execute NFL concepts. It doesn't matter the competition you're facing. You get to a certain level down the depth chart at the quarterback position, and you just have guys who can't get to their second read or third read. Now, sometimes you'll see guys light it up in the third and fourth quarter of preseason games. And it's just because the defense is so bad that like the first read doesn't get covered. So these quarterbacks just dump it off to the first read all the time, and it looks like they're playing great when they're really not playing it at an NFL level. And that's why you see very few of these preseason superstars ever amount to anything. A lot of times when you see offensive production, especially through the air, it's just bad defense. I think back to a year ago. This wasn't the third and fourth quarter; it was the first and second quarter, but I remember Zach Wilson last year this time. People were hyping him up. They're talking about how much better he looks, and he was just hitting a bunch of 5-yard passes because the defense was so bad. When the defense actually executes, these games become very difficult to watch. And this was a game that was, I think it would be charitable to call this game very difficult to watch. I mean, the Jets had 202 yards in this game. Carolina had 156. Both teams gave you under 4 yards per passing attempt for the whole game. This was not pretty to watch. So the Jets come away with a win. Doesn't really count for anything, though, because it's preseason. But I think there are some takeaways. I think there was one very important takeaway from the New York Jets in this game. And it came in the form of a sack by Will McDonald. And it happened early in the second quarter. And I think you should probably know by now, Will McDonald is a key player for the Jets this year. And he's become even more key because we don't know when or if this Haason Reddick saga is going to end. Will McDonald would have been an important player anyway, just because of how much the Jets rotate defensive ends. I've said this frequently on the show, and it bears repeating that when we're talking about the way Robert Saleh runs his defense with the Jets, it's best to think of it as you have 3 starting defensive ends, because that's the way the snap share is allocated. And McDonald was going to be the third defensive end. That's where most of the projections had him. Now with Reddick out, his role is even more important, because now he's the second defensive end behind Jermaine Johnson. And Reddick was the guy who was supposed to give you most of the sacks. Jermaine's going to chip in his sacks here or there, but Jermaine's a more complete player. Jermaine Johnson does not need to be a 10-sack guy to be a really valuable player because of how effectively he plays the run. So you don't need Jermaine to be like the monster sack guy. You don't need Jermaine to get to the 12 to 15 sack area. 8 is fine for Jermaine. 7-8 is fine for Jermaine because of how effectively he plays the run. He's a complete player. Whereas Reddick was the guy you were hoping maybe could give you 12, maybe 13. And with him out of the mix, there's a lot of pass rushing production that's gone. And there's also a lot of pass rushing production that went out the door when Bryce Huff left and John Franklin Myers was traded. I mean, Reddick was supposed to kind of fill that gap. So that leaves us with Will McDonald, who really had a redshirt year as a rookie. I mean, I think that's the best way to put it. He just didn't play that much because the Jets did not have enough snaps for him because of, the guys I mentioned. Jermaine was here. Jermaine's still here, but JFM was here. Huff was here. There just weren't a lot of snaps to go to to go to Will McDonald. So it was kind of a year where he sat a lot. There were some games where he didn't play all that much. You don't really know what you have in him. Well, early in the second quarter of this game, he got a sack. And look, not all sacks are created equally. There's coverage sacks. There are sacks where the offense busted an assignment up front and you just have a free path to the quarterback. This was one where Will McDonald beat his guy. And, level of competition, of course, matters in the preseason. But what I saw in the way he got that sack, I think is repeatable because he used a great spin move to the inside. And it's the second straight week he did it. This is in the opener against Washington in the preseason, he registered a quarterback hit on a spin move. Now it got wiped off the board because he got called for a bogus roughing the passer penalty. But I don't care about the roughing the passer penalty. I don't care that the stat officially went off the board because of the penalty. I know what I saw. I saw an ability that can be replicated, a spin move. And when the Jets drafted McDonald, I made some notes after watching some of his footage at Iowa State. And one of the things I was going through my old notes from right after he was drafted, and I wrote down that he has the makings of a good spin move. He mistimes it frequently. Let's see how he looks in a year once he's got NFL coaching, once he's had a year to practice. And after 1 year of practice, it's looking like a legit move. Now, McDonald's got his challenges because Robert Saleh said at this started training camp, they kind of changed their plans for him. The original plan for McDonald was to bulk up, in the 250, 255 range. Saleh indicated he's playing about the same weight he was last year. The Jets have him listed on their website at 236. Let's maybe he added a couple pounds. He's at 240. That's not just at the small end defensive ends in the NFL. That's like the very smallest you could be as a defensive end in the NFL. So McDonald's not going to be a guy who, is going to overpower guys, at least playing at this weight. He's not going to be a guy with a great bull rush. He's not going to be a guy with a lot of power moves. His moves are going to be more, I don't like using the word finesse when we're talking about pass rushing because nothing about pass rushing is really finesse, but the spin move's not a power move. The spin moves, you're using your athletic ability to beat a guy. Now, I think that, and I said this last week, and I think it's true. You don't need like 6 different pass rushing moves to be an effective pass rusher. You just need a couple moves that fit together, a couple moves that complement each other. And for McDonald playing at his size, I would assume the reason the Jets kept him at the 235, 240 range is that they think that's where he's going to be at his most explosive athletically. So I think a speed rush is going to be really important for McDonald. And the speed rush is just like you fire off out of your stance and you beat the tackle outside to the corner. And if you combine a speed rush with an effective spin move, now you got something. Now you can rush the passer effectively with those 2 moves because you kind of keep the offensive line guessing. If the offensive line, is really worried about, if the tackle's really worried about the speed rush, he's worried about getting beat to the corner, he's going to set way outside, and that's going to leave his inside exposed to the spin move where you can spin back inside. If you have the spin move in your head, you're worried about the guy beating you to the inside. Maybe you don't go as far out, and that leaves you susceptible to a speed rush against a really athletic defensive end. So it's not going to be easy for Will McDonald to have success playing in the 235, 240 range with defensive end, but there's a path. There's a path for him to be a productive player. And I think what we've seen these first 2 weeks of the preseason is encouraging. And boy, do we need encouragement because we don't know what's going on with Haason Reddick. I'm officially I'm worried about Haason Reddick train. After months of being in wait and see mode, I think we're to the point where we don't know what's going to happen. I'm no longer just assuming Reddick's going to be there week 1. I'm hoping he is, but I'm not assuming it anymore. And that puts much more spotlight on Will McDonald. And that's why I needed to see this because if I wasn't seeing Will McDonald produce in these preseason games, I'd be, I'm worried anyway. I'd be a lot more worried. This at least gives me some peace of mind that maybe McDonald's starting to put the pieces together. And McDonald, who's putting the pieces together, is going to help the Jets weather this storm with Reddick. And hopefully Reddick gets back at some point, and then you really got something. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to an underappreciated phase of the game. It's a phase of the game where we can't really evaluate it in practice. Well, there was one player who really stepped up for the Jets and maybe even made a case for a roster spot. We'll talk about who it is and what he does, continuing here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, you're not burning cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, recapping a Jets preseason win. They beat the Carolina Panthers 15-12 Saturday, week 2 preseason action. I mean, who really cares that the Jets won the game? It's more about the individual performances in the preseason. And when we talk about individual performances, I mean, this was an ugly game, but there was a guy who really stood out if you watch this game in the second half, and his name is Brandon Codrington. And if you are saying who, you're not alone. I mean, look, I do a 5-day-a-week Jets podcast. I run a New York Jets website. I'm focused on the Jets, practically every day of the year. And I like to think I'm pretty thorough. And this was the first time I'd heard of this guy. Codrington is a rookie out of North Carolina Central. His natural position is defensive back. But if you watched the second half on Saturday, and I mean, God bless you if you did, because that was not an enjoyable endeavor watching this game. I mean, Codrington put on a show in the return game. He ripped off a 63-yard kickoff return, ripped off a 31-yard punt return, and then his low return on the day was a 15-yard punt return. So what a phenomenal performance by this rookie. And a guy who came from completely off the radar to now maybe could he conceivably get a roster spot? I mean, look, a year ago, Xavier Gipson made the team out of nowhere because of his performance in the return game. And the Jets have been open that, the return competition's open. The return competition, they're holding an open competition for the return jobs. And here's the other thing. I don't know that there was necessarily a leader in the clubhouse heading into Saturday, because if you've ever watched training camp practices, I mean, they don't do a great job simulating game action, but there's really nothing you can take from returns. I mean, they don't allow hitting, so you can't really get a sense of who's a good return guy. I mean, really, the practice comes down to whether the guys can catch the ball, can catch the kickoffs and punts. And after that, they kind of just jog, they kind of just go through the motion. So when we talk about the utility of preseason games, I mean, there are a couple of things that come to mind. First is you get young guys some reps. You get some. Second is you can kind of sort through the competitions the various competitions for certain roster spots you've got, especially when you're talking about 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, the last few spots on your roster. And no place could that be more pronounced than special teams, because again, special teams you can't really simulate in practice. And look, I think Codrington at least now has a shot to make the roster. I mean, I don't think he's going to make the team solely as a corner, but when you're talking about a guy who maybe, your number 5, number 6 corner, not talking about a guy who you're expecting to play much anyway. The most impact a guy like that could have would be playing on special teams. It could be, providing the unit a boost. And of course, this year, famously, if you've been watching, they changed the kickoff rule. So kickoffs are now expected to have a bigger role in the NFL. And I mean, I have some thoughts on that. I've watched some of these preseason games with the new rules, and I've seen kickoffs emphasized. And when I watch this, it reminds me that kickoffs usually aren't very exciting. It makes me wonder why the league decided to emphasize them, what the big deal was with the kickoff going away. But Codrington's returns were an exception. Maybe that's the answer, because those were some explosive plays. And because of these new rules, there are going to be a lot more kickoffs run back than there happened in the past. I mean, over the last couple of years, I questioned whether, you'd even dedicate a roster spot to a guy who could only return kickoffs because of how rare that was. Becoming more common now. Now, these are only 3 returns, even by the caliber of special teamers, the guys Carolina was putting out there, probably not that great compared with what you'll go up against the regular season game. I mean, you're going up against guys who are, borderline practice squatters. But still, I think when you break off 3 big returns, it makes a point. It shows something. And I'm on the record for being very passionate about special teams. The special teams kind of fly under the radar. And, everybody focuses on the offense and the defense, and rightly so. But we act like special teams aren't important when around 20% of the plays in a given game are from special teams. Now, the stars we focus on, they're the quarterbacks, they're the wide receivers, the guys making the big plays, the guys on the other side of the ball, the guys that get the sacks, the guys that get the interceptions. You don't see as many exciting plays on special teams, going back to what I said. But special teams can make a big difference. Again, around 20% of the plays in that neighborhood, not exactly, but in that neighborhood. And you think back to the last time the Jets were good, the Rex Ryan days. Mike Westhoff's special teams made such a difference for those Rex teams. Every single big game the Jets won, the Jets special teams outperformed the other team's special teams. Now, sometimes it was just the other team not doing the job. In 2009, Cincinnati missed a couple field goals in the playoffs. Next week, San Diego missed a couple field goals in the playoffs. But sometimes the Jets special teams made big plays. In the 2010 playoffs, in the divisional round in Foxborough against the Patriots, where the Jets pulled off a big upset, Eric Smith made a huge play on a fake punt to get the Jets the ball back deep in New England territory late in the second quarter. And probably more to the point, a week earlier against the Indianapolis Colts in the wild card round, after the game looked lost, after Adam Vinatieri nailed a 50-yard field goal that seemingly won the Colts the game, the Jets were able to put together a game-winning drive in the last minute, and it was set up by a huge Antonio Cromartie kickoff return. Easy to look past special teams, but guys who play special teams effectively can make a big difference. And that's one of the reasons, as the Jets have built their roster the last couple of years, they've had an eye to special teams. Was Justin Hardy a guy who was a great corner? Jets never even played Justin Hardy a corner. He, however, was a priority free agent signing because the Jets loved his work across the special teams coverage units. Last year, when the Jets brought Irv Charles aboard, when they brought him onto the active roster, it's not because Irv Charles is a guy who has a tremendous amount of talent at the wide receiver position. It's not because he has a tremendous amount of potential at the wide receiver position. It's because they like the way he played special teams, the way he worked on the coverage units. I like that the Jets appreciate this. I like the fact that Brant Boyer has a say over the guys the Jets keep at the bottom of the roster because, again, the last corner on your roster, the last wide receiver on your roster, they probably aren't going to play their natural position all that much. And even if they do, there's probably not a big difference between this guy and that guy. But if one guy can play special teams really well, it can make a huge difference for your team. Now, Codrington's got to back this up. He's got to keep performing well. One big game against Carolina in the preseason doesn't mean a whole lot. And I've been burned by rookie returners in the past. I mean, you go back to 2005, Justin Miller giving away a game against Jacksonville because he can't catch a punt. And ever since then, I mean, the Jets have gone through one rookie returner after another who's disappointed me. So I'm always a little nervous putting rookies back there. But hey, I mean, you have to notice the explosiveness. And if he keeps doing that, I think, he could be the shock of the 53-man roster when the Jets make their final decision. But here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to some other guys. I'll give out some game balls to some other guys who I thought played effectively in the preseason win over the Carolina Panthers. That's as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, now we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So if you want to make some money, if you believe in the Jets this year, they have over-unders. Jets are underdogs week 1 in San Francisco, so if you believe the Jets are going to win, you can put some money down on them. But you can also watch the Jets now. If you don't live in New York, Sunday Ticket's an essential. You gotta have Sunday Ticket to watch the Jets. I know the Jets have their fair share of nationally televised games this year. Not all of them are. Week 2 against Tennessee, you'll need YouTube TV if you're out of market. And now you can get it through FanDuel. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Monday, the New York Jets defeated the Carolina Panthers in preseason action 15-12 Saturday night in Charlotte. I think there were a number of good performances. We've talked about the significance of Will McDonald. We've talked about one guy who just kind of put himself on the radar, Mr. Codrington, the kick returner. But I think there were a couple other guys who flashed and who I thought were effective in this game. One is Isaiah Davis. We've spent a lot of time praising Braylon Allen, one of the backs the Jets drafted in their 2024 draft class. I was very excited when the Jets picked Isaiah Davis. I thought, I thought he was an excellent prospect. He's kind of been obscured by the breakout of Braylon Allen. Well, Saturday night, I thought Davis looked really good. Now, if you only look at the stat sheet, it's not going to look too great because he was 14 yards on 4 carries. So it's only a 3.5 yard average, but I thought he made it happen. A 9-yard run, he grinded out a 3-yard run on a 2nd and 1 to move the chains. He also had a 10-yard run that was called back on a penalty. And if that had not been wiped out, his stat line would have looked really good, and maybe people would have agreed with me. But he got a chance in a return and made a couple guys miss. He looks like a guy who can make people miss, and that was kind of the book on him in college at a small school, of course. So the competition level wasn't so great. But on an NFL field Saturday night, I thought Isaiah Davis looked really good. Quantez Stiggers, another guy from the Jets 2024 draft class, another day 3 pick. This was the guy that gets drafted out of the CFL. If you're not familiar with Quantez Stiggers' story, you should check it out. I mean, it's an amazing thing. He's devastated over the loss of his father, and kind of gave up football. And his mother signed him up for a tryout, and signed him up for a league, and he started playing and caught the attention of a guy with ties to Canadian football. Ends up in the CFL playing well, and ends up getting drafted by the New York Jets. And I think the Jets have not really decided, and the Jets have told us they have not really decided where Stiggers' long-term home's going to be. He's a defensive back. It could be outside corner. It could be slot corner. It could be safety. Made a couple really nice tackles in space. He was playing outside corner, but a couple times he got caught in space and had to make a tackle, and he did. And tackling is a critical component when you play either slot corner or safety. So even though these came at outside corner, it shows you why the Jets may be a little conflicted about where he ends up, because he's flashing skills. You have to like what you're seeing out of Quantez Stiggers. Anthony Ferkser, a guy the Jets just brought back. He was a guy who spent the 2017 training camp with the Jets as an undrafted rookie. That he did not make the team that year. Then went to Tennessee and actually put together a pretty decent couple of years. A tight end who also has experience playing fullback. The Jets signed him and cut Nick Bawden, which kind of suggests that the Jets view Ferkser as their fullback. And players like Bawden have become kind of rare in the NFL, because teams typically don't dedicate a roster spot to a guy who just plays fullback. When teams need a fullback in a formation, usually now they just go to a tight end. I think Ferkser gives you a little bit more flexibility, because unlike Bawden, he can play a conventional tight end position. And I think that he also brings more pass catching. He's been a more productive pass catcher through his career than Bawden has been. And Ferkser, he had one reception, but it was a nice reception. It went for 21 yards. He was not lined up as a fullback. He was lined up in the conventional tight end spot, which again shows you the versatility. He just caught a pass in the flat and took it up the field. I'm not sure Ferkser's roster spot is necessarily a lock at this point, but I think that certainly helps. And I think his ability to play the fullback role certainly gives him a leg up in the roster competition. And I guess I'll finish by talking about a kicker, and I'm not talking about Greg Zuerlein, who did make his only kick, but Austin Seibert, 4 for 4, including a long of 52 yards. Now, look, we know Greg Zuerlein is going to be the regular place kicker for the New York Jets, but it's nice to have a backup. And I think that in an age where practice squad rosters are expanded, it makes sense to use one of those spots on a backup kicker in case your starter gets injured. Seibert actually did kick a game for the Jets last season. Seibert's a proven competent kicker. He's not spectacular, but a proven competent kicker. And so let me give my guy Joe Douglas some credit here, because I've criticized Joe Douglas for the way he's handled kicker for years, and because Joe Douglas has deserved criticism for the way he's handled kicker for years. There's always a kicker available. There's always some guy who's proven he can do it in the NFL. And for years, the Jets refused to sign these guys. They kept bringing in these big-legged guys who were undrafted free agents, because we're trying to strike lightning in the bottle and find like the best kicker in the NFL for the next decade, instead of just focusing on finding guys who can kick, finding guys who have shown you they can kick. Jets finally brought in Greg Zuerlein, a guy who was a proven kicker. It's worked out well. Now with Austin Seibert, you've got a second guy who's at least proven he can be a competent kicker in this league. So keep him around as your number 2 guy in case anything happens to Greg during the season. Now, I mean, if Seibert has another good performance in the preseason, another team may snatch him up, and there's nothing you can do about that. But Austin Seibert showing you he can kick in this league. So I see no issue with. He's not going to look. You're not going to keep two kickers on the 53-man roster, but you can keep Seibert around on the practice. If you can keep him on the practice squad, it makes all the sense in the world, because it's nice to have a second guy just in case anything happens to your primary kicker. Seibert 4 for 4 in this game, an excellent performance. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.